In a sterile hospital room, 9-year-old Lily clings to a dream, meeting Jason Statham, her fearless hero. As her frail body battles cancer, her father, Michael, pens a desperate plea. What unfolds is a tale of courage, kindness, and a legacy that defies the odds. Prepare to be moved. St. Mary's Hospital stood quietly amidst a small suburban neighborhood, where ancient oak trees cast their shadows over the road leading to the main gate. Inside room 304 was a different world, cold, silent, with only the steady beep-beep of the heart monitor breaking the stillness. On the pristine white bed, Lily lay, so small she seemed almost swallowed by the hospital blanket. Her light brown hair, once thick and gently curled, was now reduced to a few fragile strands after rounds of chemotherapy. Her large pale green eyes still lit up whenever she smiled, though those smiles were growing rarer by the day. Lily was only 9 years old, but her life had been confined within these white walls for nearly 2 years. Leukemia, the disease the doctors referred to with a long, complicated name that Michael, Lily's father, didn't bother to remember, had stolen her childhood. Gone were the afternoons spent running through the fields near their home, the ringing laughter as she played with their little dog Max, the evenings curled up on the old sofa watching action movies with her dad. All that remained were memories, fading in Michael's mind each time he looked at his daughter through the hazy glass of his grief. Michael sat by Lily's bedside, his calloused hands resting lightly on the edge of the blanket. He had once been a firefighter, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a steady gaze. But now he was just a helpless father, his legs limping from an injury sustained in a fire 3 years ago, his heart shattered by his inability to shield his daughter from this invisible enemy. He often looked at Lily, searching for the image of the little girl who used to run around the house, pretending to be a superhero with a towel tied around her neck. But now she was just a tiny shadow, trapped by IV tubes and bitter pills. Lily loved action movies. Among the films she watched over and over, The Expendables was her favorite. She adored Jason Statham, the man with the steely gaze, gravelly voice, and fearless ability to take down any villain without hesitation. Lily called him the hero who fears nothing. Every time they watched, she'd sit close to the screen, her small hands clenched tight, squealing with excitement as Statham landed a punch or leapt from an exploding car. "Dad, I want to be strong like Mr. Jason," wherever she'd once said, her eyes blazing with determination. Michael would just smile, ruffling her hair. "You're already stronger than him, sweetheart." But now that strength was slipping away from Lily day by day. The doctors whispered to Michael in the hallway, using phrases like end stage and palliative care. He hated those words. They sounded like surrender, as if they'd already given up on Lily. But he couldn't give up. Never. One evening, as the dim hospital lights filtered through the window, Lily stirred from a fitful sleep. Her tiny hands, so thin the blue veins stood out starkly, clutched at Michael's sleeve. He leaned down, pressing his ear close to hear her faint voice. "Dad," Lily whispered, her breath as fragile as a passing breeze, "I want to meet Jason Statham." Michael looked up, meeting Lily's green eyes. They still sparkled, though it was just a faint glimmer amidst the storm of her illness. He forced a smile, trying to keep his voice steady. "Jason Statham, huh? What do you want to meet him for?" Lily closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength to continue. "He beats all the bad guys. I think, if I meet him, he could help me be strong again. I don't want to be weak like this anymore, Dad." Her words cut into Michael's heart like a knife. He wanted to hold her tight, to shout to the world that his daughter wasn't weak, that she was the strongest person he'd ever known. But he just sat there, silent, feeling her small hand tremble in his. He knew the truth. Lily's body was losing the fight. The doctors had made it clear. Maybe a few weeks, or if they were lucky, a few months. But looking into her eyes, he couldn't say no. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse as he fought back tears. "I'll try, Lily, I promise." Lily smiled, a faint smile that briefly lit up the room. "I knew you could do it, Dad. Mr. Jason helps people, right? He'll come." Michael nodded, though he didn't believe it himself. Jason Statham was a Hollywood star, a busy man with breathtaking stunts and a packed schedule. How could he possibly know about a little girl in a forgotten town? But as Lily closed her eyes, drifting back to sleep with that smile still on her lips, Michael knew he had to do something. He couldn't let her down. Not this time. That night, as the machines hummed steadily in the room, Michael pulled a piece of paper from the old notebook in his pocket. He sat under the faint glow of the bedside lamp, his hands trembling as he began to write. He wasn't good with words, didn't know how to make them sound fancy, but he wrote from his heart about Lily, his little girl who'd fought this disease longer than any fire he'd ever faced, about how she still smiled, still dreamed, even as her body slipped away, about her final wish, a dream he knew was far-fetched but begged to come true. Mr. Statham, he wrote, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm Michael, Lily's dad. She's a 9-year-old fighting cancer. She's your biggest fan. She sees you as her hero, and right now she has one wish, to meet you before her time runs out. I don't have anything to offer but this plea. If you can, please come. Lily deserves to meet her hero. When he finished, Michael folded the letter, his hands shaking as he sealed the envelope. He found an address for Jason Statham's management team online, a generic one he knew might bury the letter among thousands of others. But he sent it anyway, on a gray, rainy morning, standing in front of the hospital mailbox with a heavy heart. He didn't expect much. It was just a faint glimmer of hope, something to ease his pain and keep his promise to Lily. But he didn't know that, somewhere out there, a chain of events was about to begin. A miracle that even a man who'd faced roaring flames couldn't have imagined. The days after Michael sent the letter passed in a haze of waiting and silence. He didn't tell Lily about it, not wanting to raise her hopes, only to see them dashed. But every time he looked at his daughter, he could see the question in her eyes. Dad, have you done anything to get Mr. Jason here yet? Michael would just smile, stroke Lily's hair, and recount old stories about the time he saved a cat from a fire, or when Lily pretended to be a superhero, leaping from the sofa to the floor. Those memories were like precious gems now, glimmering faintly amidst the darkness, steadily enveloping their lives. Lily's health grew worse. She slept more, sometimes waking for only a few hours a day. When she was awake, she still tried to talk, though her voice was so weak Michael had to lean close to hear. Dad, today I dreamed about Mr. Jason, she whispered one afternoon as pale sunlight filtered through the window blinds. He was driving so fast, beating up the bad guys. Then he turned to me and said, Lily, you're as strong as I am. Do you think he meant it? Michael swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. Of course he did, sweetheart. He knows you're strong. You're my fearless Lily. Lily smiled, a tiny smile that warmed Michael's heart for a fleeting moment. But as she closed her eyes and slipped back into sleep, the steady hum of the machines reminded him cruelly that their time was running out. The doctors came more often, bringing charts and explanations Michael didn't want to hear. We're doing everything to keep her comfortable, one doctor said, his voice gentle but detached. Comfortable. The word echoed in Michael's mind like a sentence. He didn't want Lily to just be comfortable. He wanted her to live, to hear her laughter ring through their little house again. But deep down, he knew that wasn't going to happen. Michael spent day and night by Lily's side, leaving the room only when he had to grab water or choke down a dry sandwich from the hospital cafeteria. He often sat by the window, staring at the road leading to the hospital, imagining a sleek black car, the kind Jason Statham drove in his movies, pulling up to deliver a miracle. But day after day, there was nothing but the sound of rain and the footsteps of nurses in the hallway. Among those caring for Lily, Hannah stood out to Michael. She was a young nurse, about 25, with blonde hair tied up high and warm brown eyes. Hannah didn't just do her job, changing IV lines, checking machines. She took time to talk to Lily. She'd recount action scenes from Jason Statham's movies, making Lily giggle for a few precious seconds. You know, Hannah once said to Michael, Lily's the strongest kid I've ever met. I've seen plenty of patients give up, but not her. She still dreams, still hopes. Michael nodded but said nothing. He knew Hannah was trying to comfort him, but her words only deepened his ache. Lily was strong, yes, but that strength wasn't enough to keep her with him. One evening, as Michael sat by Lily's bed, Hannah walked in with a tray of medical supplies. She glanced at Lily, who was sleeping with her Lee Christmas action figure, Jason Statham's character from The Expendables, clutched tightly in her arms. Hannah smiled faintly, then turned to Michael. She's still talking about Jason Statham? She asked softly, careful not to wake Lily. Yeah, Michael replied, his eyes fixed on his daughter's pale face. Every day. It's the only thing keeping her spirits up. Hannah paused as if mulling something over. Then she sat down in the chair across from Michael, setting the tray aside. Have you ever tried reaching out to him? Jason Statham, I mean? Michael looked up, slightly surprised. I sent a letter, he said, his voice low, but I don't think it'll reach him. People like him, they're too far out of reach. Hannah nodded, but a spark of determination flickered in her eyes. Maybe you're right, but maybe not. I've seen miracles happen here, Michael. Things no one expects. Michael didn't reply. He didn't want to argue, didn't want to hope, but Hannah wasn't deterred. After her shift ended, she lingered in the nurse's break room, pulled out her phone, and opened the letter Michael had once left behind on the table while writing it. She'd kept it, not out of nosiness, but because she'd felt the pain in every word. Hannah snapped a photo of the letter and posted it on Twitter with a caption. Lily, a 9-year-old fighting cancer, has one dream, to meet Jason Statham. Help this little girl meet her hero. Yes, Lily meets Jason. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few friends would share it. A handful of strangers would leave kind words. But as she turned off her phone and went to bed, she didn't know she just dropped a pebble into a pond, and the ripples were about to spread farther than she could imagine. The next morning, Hannah woke to hundreds of notifications on her phone. Her post had been retweeted over 5,000 times in just a few hours. The hashtag #LilyMeets Jason began popping up across Twitter, accompanied by comments from strangers worldwide. Make this happen for Lily, one wrote. Jason Statham, you're a hero. Go see this girl, another urged. A major Expendables fan page picked up the post and shared it, boosting it to tens of thousands of interactions. By noon, Lily's story had spread to Instagram and Facebook. A famous athlete retweeted the post, adding, Jason, you've got to see this. A comedian with millions of followers recorded a short video retelling Lily's story and calling for shares. Local news outlets took notice, and a small TV station even contacted the hospital for an interview. Michael learned of it when Hannah burst into Lily's room, her face flushed with excitement. Michael, you have to see this, she said, thrusting her phone at him. Michael stared at the screen, seeing his letter, those words he'd written in the dark, now read by thousands. He muttered, What did you do, Hannah? I just wanted to help, Hannah replied, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't expect it to blow up like this. But look, people are trying. Maybe Jason will see it. Michael looked at Hannah, then at Lily sleeping. He didn't know how to feel, hopeful or afraid it would all amount to nothing. Thank you, he said finally, his voice rough. But I don't want Lily to know. If nothing comes of it, I don't want her disappointed. Hannah nodded, but deep down, she believed something would happen. She just didn't know how soon. Thousands of miles away on a film set in London, Jason Statham was taking a break between scenes. Dressed in a black leather jacket, he held a coffee cup, his sharp gaze as intense as ever. His latest movie, an action-packed thriller, was in the middle of a rushed shooting schedule, keeping him busy from dawn to dusk. Sarah, Jason's assistant, entered the break room, her face tense. Her phone buzzed incessantly with hundreds of Twitter notifications. Jason, you need to see this, she said, setting her phone on the table in front of him. Jason frowned, putting his coffee down. What's so urgent? He asked, his gravelly voice cutting through the air. Sarah didn't answer, just pointed at the screen. Jason picked up the phone, scrolling through Hannah's post. He read Michael's letter, word by word, then looked at the attached photo, a tiny girl clutching a Lee Christmas figure, her eyes bright despite her pale, sickly face. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Sarah stood there, waiting. Finally, Jason looked up, his usual cold stare softened by a rare warmth. This kid, he said, his voice low. She's tougher than anyone I've ever fought on screen. Sarah nodded. What do you think? Want to do something about it? Jason stood, grabbing his jacket. Get the car ready, he said curtly. I'm going there, now. Sarah froze, stunned. But what about this afternoon's shoot? The director can wait, Jason interrupted, heading for the door. This kid can't. The hospital room was quiet that afternoon, save for the steady hum of the machines and the occasional rustle of pages as Michael read aloud from an old adventure book. Lily lay still, her small chest rising and falling beneath a tangle of IV tubes, her eyes half open as she listened to her father's voice. The story was about a fearless explorer braving storms and jungles. A tale Michael had chosen because it reminded him of Lily, his little adventurer, his fighter. But her breathing was slower now, her responses softer, and Michael knew, deep down, that even the bravest explorers eventually ran out of strength. He paused mid-sentence, his throat tightening as he glanced at her. Lily's tiny hand rested on the worn-out action figure of Lee Christmas, the character Jason Statham had played in The Expendables. She'd carried it everywhere since she was 6, a constant companion through every hospital stay, every needle prick. Michael reached out, brushing a strand of thinning hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You're tougher than any hero in this book. You know that?" Lily's lips curved into a faint smile, but she didn't reply. She was drifting again, her energy slipping away like sand through his fingers. Michael set the book down, leaning back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window. The world outside moved on. Cars rolled by, birds chirped in the trees. But in here, time felt frozen, trapped in a limbo of waiting. Then the door creaked open. Michael didn't look up at first. He assumed it was Hannah, or maybe another nurse coming to check Lily's vitals. It happened so often that the sound barely registered anymore. But then a voice cut through the silence, deep, gravelly, unmistakable. "All right, where's this fearless little fighter I've been hearing about?" Michael's head snapped up, his breath catching in his chest. Standing in the doorway was Jason Statham. No entourage, no cameras, just him. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in a black leather jacket and jeans, his piercing eyes scanning the room. For a moment, Michael couldn't move, couldn't speak. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. He'd seen this man on screens, in explosions and fistfights. But here he was, standing in a hospital room in the middle of nowhere. Lily stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she turned her head toward the sound. Her gaze was unfocused at first, clouded by exhaustion, but then it sharpened. She saw him. Her tiny hands gripped the blanket, and her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. Mr. Jason?" Jason stepped forward, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. "That's me, kiddo. And you must be Lily, right? The one they're all talking about out there." Lily's eyes widened, her frail fingers trembling as she reached up to touch her face, as if to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She looked at Michael, searching for confirmation, but he was still frozen, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. Jason pulled a chair over to the bedside and sat down, leaning in close so Lily wouldn't have to strain to see him. I can't believe it," Lily whispered, her voice shaky but filled with awe. "You're really here." "Had to be," Jason said, his tone soft but firm. "Heard you've been fighting harder than anyone I've ever taken down in a movie. Figured I'd come see the toughest kid around." Lily let out a small, shaky laugh, the sound so fragile yet so alive that it pierced Michael's heart. He wiped his eyes quickly, turning away for a moment to compose himself. He'd spent months bracing for the worst, steeling himself against hope. But now it was here, sitting right in front of him, and he didn't know how to process it. Jason leaned back, crossing his arms casually, like he was just catching up with an old friend. "So, tell me, Lily, which movie of mine do you like best? I'm betting it's The Expendables, right? With that little guy you've got there." He nodded toward the action figure clutched in her hand. Lily nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up in a way Michael hadn't seen in weeks. "Yeah, when you fought all those bad guys on the ship, and then you jumped off before it exploded. That was so cool." Jason chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Glad you liked it. Took a few bruises to get that one right. But you know what? That's nothing compared to what you've been doing. You're the real deal, Lily." Her smile widened, though it took effort, and she clutched the action figure tighter. "I try to be strong like you," she said softly. "I don't want to be scared." Jason's expression softened, and he leaned in closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "You're not just strong, kid. You're fearless. I've met a lot of tough people, but none of them hold a candle to you." Tears slipped down Michael's face as he watched, unable to hold them back any longer. For the first time in months, he saw Lily light up, truly light up, her face glowing with a joy he thought was lost forever. The weight that had crushed his chest for so long eased, just a little, and he felt something he hadn't felt in ages: gratitude. Jason didn't rush off. He stayed talking with Lily for hours, They swapped stories, him about wild stunts gone wrong, her about the time she'd tried to fight a nurse with a plastic spoon because she didn't want another shot. He laughed, a real hearty laugh, and let her give him a new nickname, Jason the Unstoppable. She giggled so hard she had to pause to catch her breath, and Michael couldn't help but smile through his tears. But Jason wasn't done. As the evening stretched on, he reached behind him and pulled out a small black bag he'd brought in unnoticed. "Now listen up," he said, his tone playful but serious. "Every fighter needs their gear, right? And I figured you deserve something special." Lily's eyes widened as he handed her the bag. Her trembling hands fumbled with it, and Michael leaned over to help, pulling out a tiny leather jacket, a perfect miniature of the one Jason wore. Embroidered on the back in bold silver letters were the words, "Lily the Fearless." She gasped, clutching it to her chest, her voice barely audible. "Is this really mine?" "Yours and only yours," Jason said, tapping the jacket lightly. "You've earned it, kid. Real fighters don't need a movie set to prove they're tough. You've been doing it right here." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Lily hugged the jacket tightly, tears welling in her eyes, too overwhelmed to speak. Michael turned away again, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold it together. This wasn't just a visit. This was something bigger, something he couldn't put into words. Then Jason did something no one expected. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and started recording. "All right, listen up, everyone," he said, his voice steady and commanding as he looked into the lens. "I want you all to meet someone way tougher than me. This is Lily the Fearless, the strongest fighter I've ever come across. She's been taking on battles I couldn't even imagine, and she's still standing. So here's the deal. You don't forget her, got it?" "This kid's a legend," Lily gasped, realizing what was happening. Jason was talking to the world, her world, and he was telling them about her. When he finished recording, he turned back to her, a grin tugging at his lips. "Now they all know your name, Lily, just like I promised." She didn't say anything at first. She just reached out, her tiny arm trembling as she wrapped it around his, holding on as tight as she could. For the first time since she'd gotten sick, she didn't feel like a patient, a number on a chart, or a fading shadow. She felt like a hero, his hero, and it was a feeling she'd carry with her forever. Michael watched, his heart swelling and breaking all at once. He'd spent so long fighting to keep Lily alive, to give her one more day, one more smile, and now here was this man, a stranger who owed them nothing, giving her something no medicine could, a moment of pure, unshakable joy. He mouthed a silent thank you to Jason, who nodded back, a quiet understanding passing between them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow through the window, Jason stood to leave. He ruffled Lily's hair gently, his voice low. "You keep fighting, all right? And if you ever need me, I'm just a call away." Lily nodded, still clutching her jacket. "I will, Mr. Jason. Thank you for coming." He gave her one last smile, then turned to Michael, extending a hand. "You've got one hell of a kid there," he said quietly. "You're doing good, mate." Michael shook his hand, his grip tight with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," he managed to say, his voice breaking. "You don't have to," Jason replied, then stepped out, the door closing softly behind him. The room felt different after he left, lighter somehow, despite the machines and the sterile walls. Lily looked at her father, her eyes shining. "He called me fearless, Daddy," she whispered. "Do you think I really am?" Michael pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sweetheart, you've always been fearless, always." And in that moment, as the world outside faded into night, Michael knew that whatever came next, this day, this gift, would stay with them forever. The days following Jason Statham's visit were different. The hospital room, once a place of quiet despair, buzzed with a subtle energy, a warmth that lingered like the afterglow of a fire. Lily clutched her tiny leather jacket everywhere she went, even when she was too weak to sit up. The words "Lily the Fearless" embroidered on the back became her shield, her badge of honor. She traced the letters with her fingertips, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and whispered to Michael, "Daddy, I'm like Mr. Jason now, right?" "You're better than him, sweetheart," Michael would reply, his voice soft but firm. "Way better." The video Jason had recorded spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it racked up millions of views, shared by fans, celebrities, and news outlets alike. People left comments calling Lily an inspiration, a warrior, a real-life hero. "This kid's tougher than any action star," one post read. "Jason Statham just met his match," said another. A group of the Expendables fans started a fundraiser in her name, raising thousands of dollars for the hospital overnight. Lily's story wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a movement. Michael watched it all unfold from the tablet Hannah had brought in, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the messages. Strangers from places he'd never heard of, Australia, Japan, Brazil, sent pictures of themselves wearing leather jackets in solidarity, captioned with, "For Lily the Fearless." He showed Lily the best ones, her eyes lighting up with every new story. "They know me, Daddy," she said one evening, her voice faint but proud. "They really know me." "They do," Michael said, brushing a tear from his cheek. "And they'll never forget you." But even as the world rallied around her, Lily's body grew weaker. The spark in her eyes remained, but her laughter softened into sighs, her movements slowed to a whisper. The doctors increased her pain medication, their faces etched with the quiet resignation Michael had come to recognize. He hated it, that look, those whispered conversations outside the door. But he couldn't deny the truth any longer. Time was slipping away, and no amount of love or leather jackets could stop it. One afternoon, as rain pattered against the window, Michael's phone buzzed on the bedside table. He glanced at it, expecting another update from Hannah about the fundraiser, but the number was unknown. Frowning, he opened the message. It was a video, and when he pressed play, Jason Statham's face filled the screen. "Michael, Lily," Jason said, his voice steady but warm, filmed against a backdrop of a massive screen displaying Lily's photo. The one from the hospital, her holding the action figure. "You've changed my life, you know that? And now I want to do something to make sure Lily's light never fades." Michael's hands shook as he turned the volume up, his heart pounding. Jason continued, "I'm starting something big, a foundation called Lily the Fearless Fund. It's for kids fighting cancer, to help their families, to make sure no one goes through this alone. Lily, your fight, your strength, it's going to inspire thousands of kids just like you." Lily, lying beside him, turned her head toward the screen, her breathing shallow but steady. A soft, tired smile crossed her lips. "Really?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael could hardly speak. "Yes, sweetheart," he managed, his throat tight. "Really?" Jason's voice softened as he looked straight into the camera. "You're not just a fighter, Lily. You're a legend. And this is my promise. Your name will live on." The video ended, and Michael sat there, staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down his face. He looked at Lily, who was still smiling, her eyes half closed but peaceful. "They're going to help kids because of me," she murmured. "That's good, right, Daddy?" "It's more than good," Michael said, pulling her close. "It's everything." The next day, the news broke. The Lily the Fearless Fund was official, announced by Jason Statham himself in a press release that dominated headlines. Donations poured in, tens of thousands of dollars within hours, from fans, companies, even other actors who'd been touched by Lily's story. Families sent messages thanking her, saying she'd given them hope. A mother wrote, "My son's fighting too, and knowing Lily's out there makes him want to keep going." Little girl from Texas sent a drawing of herself and Lily in matching leather jackets, captioned, "We're fearless together." Michael read every message to Lily, her small hand resting in his as she listened. She was too weak to respond, but her eyes told him everything. She was happy, truly happy, in a way he hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. The days grew quieter after that. Lily's laughter, once the brightest sound in the hospital, faded into soft breaths. She held on to the leather jacket Jason had given her, keeping it close even as her strength ebbed away. Michael stayed by her side, holding her hand, telling her stories, singing the silly songs she'd loved as a toddler. He didn't leave, not even to eat or sleep. He couldn't. Every second mattered now. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the room in hues of gold and pink, Lily opened her eyes. She looked at Michael, her gaze clear despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean in to hear. "Do you think Mr. Jason remembers me?" Michael swallowed the lump in his throat, his grip tightening on her hand. "Sweetheart, he doesn't just remember you. He made sure the whole world will. You're his hero, Lily." A small, peaceful smile touched her lips. "That's good," she said, her eyes fluttering shut. "That means I really was Lily the Fearless." "You always were, baby," Michael said, his voice breaking as a tear slipped down his cheek. "Always." Later that night, as the machines hummed softly and the rain began again outside, Lily closed her eyes for the last time. She slipped away quietly, wrapped in her father's love and the legacy she'd unknowingly built. Michael held her, his sobs muffled against her tiny shoulder, until the nurses came in, their footsteps gentle on the tiled floor. News of Lily's passing spread quickly, and the response was overwhelming. Social media lit up with tributes, photos of her jacket, clips of Jason's video, messages of love and loss. The Lily the Fearless Fund saw a surge in donations, enough to fund treatments for dozens of children in her honor. People didn't just mourn her, they celebrated her, vowing to keep her spirit alive. Jason Statham posted a simple tribute, a photo of Lily holding her jacket, her smile bright despite the tubes and wires, with the caption, "She called herself Lily the Fearless, and that's exactly who she was. Rest easy, kid. Your fight lives on." The post garnered millions of likes, but Jason didn't stop there. Days later, he arrived at Lily's memorial, a small, private gathering at a park near the hospital. No cameras, no press, just him in a black jacket, standing quietly at the back. Michael saw him as the service ended, the crowd thinning out under the gray sky. He walked over, his limp more pronounced from exhaustion, and stopped in front of Jason. "You didn't have to come," he said, his voice raw. "Had to," Jason replied, his tone steady. "She deserved it." They stood in silence for a moment, two men bound by a little girl's courage. Before he left, Jason placed a small plaque on the ground near a tree, a simple stone engraved with "Lily the Fearless, Hero Forever." Michael stared at it, his chest tightening, and realized something. Lily wasn't gone. Her story had just begun. In the months that followed, the Lily the Fearless Fund grew, helping families across the country. Michael joined the effort, turning his grief into action, speaking at events to share Lily's story. Every time he did, he felt her with him, in the rustle of a leather jacket, in the strength of a child's smile, in the kindness of strangers who'd never met her but loved her all the same. Lily's life had been short, but her impact was infinite. She touched a movie star, inspired a movement, and reminded the world that even the smallest fighters could leave the biggest marks. And as Michael stood by that tree one quiet afternoon, the wind whispering through the leaves, he knew she'd always be his fearless little girl, a hero not just to him but to everyone she'd ever reached.